before I hand it over to Janet.
Oh, thanks, Elizabeth. Thank you for that, Elizabeth. I appreciate that. Okay. Are we live? We're live. Okay. Welcome, everyone, to the workshop. I'm very excited about this workshop on advisory council. This was something that came to me when I first got elected 9 years ago, that it would be great to have some consistency and some, more information on these appointments that we all make. And I'm just so excited about the work that's been done. And thanks to Janet and everyone, Elizabeth, everyone who's had things to do with this. So with that, I'm just going to start. I'm going to say that we know that this may take longer than we have. I'm going to try to, we'll assess at noon, but if I'm thinking that we'll do what's been done and where are we at. And then if we need a lot more discussion, we can, I've been given permission by the county manager to set up another workshop day to discuss if we need to take longer to discuss, our next steps moving forward. But with that, we'll see how we do with where we're at right now. So with that, I'm going to start it off with Elizabeth Holtzman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, Commissioners. I will be brief. I'm pleased and honored to introduce this morning's board workshop, primarily because it will be led by our Chief Clerk and Director of Administrative Services, Janet Guthrie, who, as you all know, is officially retiring from Ramsey County this week. If you recall, we discussed that we would be providing an update on our advisory council's work at our strategic work session, planning session that we did earlier this year in January. This work had been paused in the past year during the pandemic. Many of you expressed interest in this work and an update, primarily because of your interactions with our constituents and your liaison work with our advisory councils. I want to note that for the purpose of this presentation, when we say advisory council, it includes boards, commissions, committees, and ad hoc groups, both formal and informal. So just keep that in mind as we talk about this. Before handing it over to Janet, I do want to acknowledge the team who has been integral to this overall work. You have Zia Zhang, who will be co-presenting with us today, Abby Goldsmith, Karen Schreck, and also members of the policy and planning team, Mi Cheng, Zachary Hilton, and Cassie Fitzgerald. Given that this work is being led from the county manager's office, it's very important that we exemplify, model, and uplift our county core's value in this work of people, integrity, community, leadership, and equity. And this is really the crux of this work. And so with that, I will hand it over to Janet to lead in the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And what I'm going to cover is just really some historical information, but because a couple of you are new to the board and, I wanted to make sure we didn't skip the piece about what had happened up to the point of the board workshop that we gave in May of 2019. So, this was, as Elizabeth mentioned, was a directive as it related to alignment with the strategic priorities, et cetera. And we started our work in early 2019. The primary purpose was to assess the current councils that we had in the county, primarily to look at how effective they were, what kind of representation they had as a makeup for those committees, and also just what sort of value were these committees or councils providing to both the county and the community. We had an original team that was cross-sectional, cross service teams, primarily based on where the councils were existing, and not all the service teams had councils that were a part of this. So if you could go on next then to the project scope. Thank you. So during this period of time, a pretty condensed period of time, we held focus groups and surveys and talked to about 110 people that were members of the various advisory councils, and 37 staff that had been working with those advisory councils. The key themes that we found as a pattern for what both members and staff identified as working really well was that the councils provided an opportunity for people to share their knowledge, their information, as well as to learn from others at the table. And it was an opportunity for people in the community to be building relationships and recognizing how their work fit into a larger network of work that's being done in their particular area. Being a community voice at the table was important for advisory council members as well as for staff. And through that, they offered a variety of perspectives, which again, you would hope for that you would see in our councils. And what they felt was really satisfying and what they had all hoped for was that they would be a part of seeing some tangible action that would be taking place as a result of their participation. Next slide. So these are a summary of the findings of things that needed improvement, basically, from the perspective, again, of council members and staff. There's an unclear relationship with the county board. People don't necessarily understand whether they reported directly to the board or were they to report up through the director of the particular department. And, you know, those things I think have been really unclear. People think about appointments by the board that they report directly back to the board, and sort of that I think needs some clarification. They also identify that there is a lack of clarity about what the purpose of the councils were and the roles that council members would play as it relates to the topic at hand. Many of them mentioned that they felt that there was a lack of connection to the actual work that was being done by the council, and not necessarily feeling that they saw themselves as a part of the, you know, where their impact was being made. Now, a couple of councils have done a really good job of having diverse representation, but the majority of them really still lack the diversification that we would like to see on there. And that's not just about racial and ethnic diversity. It's really about gender, age, socioeconomic status. It could be whether they're professionals in an area, a field, or whether they may be consumers of services of a particular field, et cetera. So there's a whole question around the diversity, and that's one of the things that obviously we want to be working on. And we've heard strongly from you as commissioners that that was important as well. There was a lack of engagement in county leadership. Basically, the decision makers for the departments were not always attending the meetings. It might have been the meetings were staffed by planners, et cetera, or supervisors, but they really wanted to be connected to the top department directors that are making decisions about the department within which this their advisory council would be functioning. Some of them were struggling with getting good attendance and getting recruitment, adequate recruitment. We've recognized that there have not been consistent ways across the board on how these committees were developed. I mean, they all developed at very different times under different circumstances. And so there's been no real consistency between how all of them function, necessarily the way that all of the applications would come in, how screening was done, et cetera. The other thing that we identified is there really have been some barriers to participation. And again, in mind, when we think about the diversity that we want to have as representation, we have to recognize that people come to advisory council participation with a different set of needs or constraints. And one of the things that we had identified too is that there was no set dedication of resources necessarily, again, universally across all of the councils as it relates to both staff and dollars that would be available, for example, to help cover some minimal costs that people might have, like parking or childcare, et cetera, if they were to participate in a council. There's been generally a lack of transparency that was identified largely by the advisory council members, feeling that sometimes the screening process or appointment process didn't seem very apparent to people. how the minutes and agendas were handled, again, with the lack of consistency across, we were identifying that that was an issue as well. And there was just a very wide variation on how people did go through that appointment and that screening and recruitment process. Next slide. So this has really led us to what I would sort of say are our recommendations that we brought to the board back in 2019 to try to address some of those issues. The first thing was to be sharing the findings that we had with those advisory councils and staff that had participated in that assessment process. We were working to develop one application for all councils. There had been about 5 or 6 different applications that were being used countywide. And so we saw the value in coming to one application that would be consistent with them all. And developing what we've called a one-stop website, meaning that there were a lot of different websites or pages that people would go to get information about some of those councils, and the value of having one place, sort of a one-stop shop for information on all the councils, the members of the councils, when agendas are being posted, minutes from meetings, when meetings are being held, where they're being held, et cetera. So that was a recommendation. Obviously expanding the idea that we would have greater diversity about the recruited to represent the community and make sure that we had the unrepresented or underrepresented voices at the table on these councils. But the thought was also to create a board leadership development program, not necessarily that we would create it internally, but that there are leadership development programs that exist in the community that help residents who may be unfamiliar with working on advisory councils to learn more about serving on a government advisory council and sort of to understand the way that processes and decisions get made, et cetera. So they get some training and then feel better prepared to be sitting at the table with other members. Developing common standards and processes, and to assure that there's accountability from those advisory councils on the work that's being done. You know, that not only just making sure that meeting minutes are reflected, but that again, there's updates that are provided on a regular basis. Dedicating resources, again, the idea of some financial money set aside, as well as staffing that would be dedicated to the work that they're doing. And the last was about realigning and leveraging the councils that already existed to look at ways that we could be making sure that that they support the entire work of the county. There has been some significant work that's been done in that area, specifically in the health and wellness service teams. And so some strategic realignment has been happening under Deputy County Manager Kathy Hedin in that whole area. So I think that's it.
Say, Madam Chair, maybe we can pause here for questions because that kind of covers the background and history.
All right, is that okay, Commissioner McDonough?
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. And I know a lot of work has gone into this, and I think about this a lot, all the way back to my first year as a county commissioner, and all of a sudden realizing I've got all these appointments that I had no clue, right? And then trying to, you know, reach out into my community to make sure I had folks that, you know, had experience or knowledge, but also trying to make sure that those individuals represented the community and how difficult that was. You know, connecting to some of those community organizations like Nexus or Wilder that have leadership development programs to do some work on, you know, in the district I work on to help do that. And then just Janet, working with you and Elizabeth on this whole process for the last couple of years. And I've really thought about this a lot and really tried to, you know, because so much of what we have in place is legacy, right? It's a legacy from when our county mission was even different, you know, when the priorities weren't were totally different than how we behaved as the county and what was important to us. And then, we're trying to massage that, right? And change is always hard, and people have ownership of that, trying to be respectful of that, but also really, really listening to the community that they're just starving for opportunities to have a voice at what we're doing as we're moving down this path here, really peeling back the issues around equity and racism. And it's not just us, right? We all sit on numbers of boards. I sit on nonprofit boards, and all these boards are doing the same thing and trying to do the same thing. And we got small groups within communities that are prepared for that, and they're just getting tugged and pulled every which way to be on every board, right? Because they're trying to achieve the same goals that we're talking about here. And I know this is late in the process, but this is really important work. And just listening to this and kind of pulling together all my thoughts and feelings over the last few years as we looked at this, and I'm thinking, what would it look like instead of us? I mean, we're still going to need some key advisory groups, right? But what would it look like if we actually focused in on the communities that we need to help us? And so, Janet, you talked about your opportunities with the American Indian community and the African American community. And Ryan, one of the first things when you came on as policy analyst, we started doing some work in the CRID community because they just weren't getting connected, right? And the work we do in the Somali community. But then you got the environmental groups that really are focused in on all the things we do that affect the environment. What would it look like if we actually had advisory groups focused around the groups? And we came to them with the issues that were connected to them. So right now I look at it the way it is in the CRID community. If they want to have impact, they need to be on a public health advisory committee. They need to be on a child protection advisory committee. They need to be on a mental health advisory committee, a chemical dependency. The list just goes on, and the capacity to be a part of that just diminishes really quickly. But what would it look like if we had some core groups that we just went to? And we've done some of that a little bit with, in the Native American community, we've got I don't recall what the acronym is. Tony, you and I have been working with the African American community on Kajal. I can't say that word right. I could say it for years. You could say it. And what that engagement looks like, from a community perspective versus specific issues or specific areas that we provide services in.
Thank you, Commissioner McDonough. I think I'm just going to echo that. But Brian, County Manager O'Connor.
How about this? I appreciate the comment. I would ask that in the follow-up piece where we come back with some action steps, I do have some thoughts around that because it's been an ongoing conversation with many of you, particularly through the Kuji-Chakaleo work, through the work with St. Paul Indians in Action. But what about other organizations and what about other community groups as well, right? And give me a shot with Elizabeth to put down something on paper, because what I would say is we have some collective, we need to have bodies that both cut across race and culture and recognize the collectivism in our work and the services individually and at a governance level. And then we also need to have culturally specific engagements to recognize the unique barriers faced by different parts of our community. And I hear that in what you're saying. I hope that's part of what you feel like you were saying. And I think we could put a vision to that, and it in no way undercuts this work. Actually, what it really does is it helps to further accentuate some of where we want to go. And if the policy director and I sit down, we can bring that back when we come back later in the evening.
Okay.
Chair
McDonough.
If I could just, I think, you've got it, Ryan, except for one piece I just maybe want to, explore a little bit more. This culturally specific kind of focus is important, right? But it could go a little bit beyond just race, right? Like the environment, I'll use the environment people, right? That really, really care about what we're doing in the county in so many different areas. As we move forward on economic development and really elevating that work, some of the work we're doing at the South Maplewood properties, right? The potential here at BTT or other sites or even other areas, that kind of transcends kind of that traditional just weighing in on Parks and Rec stuff, right? And making sure that that's important to them. And so I think the important piece is, especially when it comes to the equity piece and the voices that haven't been heard, but then what's that next step? Where are those kind of organizations or issue, or maybe not issue, but larger kind of policy driven community groups that would transcend certain, the county in so many different areas? How can we make those connections where they're meaningful? You go back to that list, and the list of things that were working well was really small, and the list that was not working so well was really large, and trying to flip flop that list around and what that looks like.
Thank you, Commissioner McDonough. Had a couple of other questions, and then we're going to assess, how much do we leave for the next meeting and what do we need to handle now with Janet here? Because I think, Sia, you can come back and do some of your work, but we'll assess then. But I'm just sensitive to, this is a really important conversation. I do not want to shortchange it. I think it's really crucial for our work. So I think it was Commissioner Carter, then Commissioner Mattis-Castillo.
Thank you. Just sharing the sentiment that's already been iterated here, I would say applause to our staff, including Janet, as she talked about the work that she has done with others, for realizing and recognizing that we are in the business of establishing relationships. And sometimes it's hard to bring people to our table. I just think of the thought that we don't care how much know until we know how much care. Sometimes we have to go to other tables, and it's about sorting out how we manage these relationships that help us to do the work that we so critically have to do. I don't have to pontificate more about that, but I know that it is both and. There isn't just a one thing that we have to do. We need to be mindful of how we're managing and cultivating relationships that help us to do the work. And thank you so much for your attention to that. I know we'll have opportunity to discuss this more.
Thank you, Commissioner Carter. Commissioner Mattis-Castillo.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. I just want to comment on Commissioner McDonough's thoughts. Is that I think you make really good points, Jim, and I think it's a both and variety. I always get a little concerned when we make any group homogenous, and we see this even in community, right? Then it's like, is it the council of 18 elected leaders that only give input for the Hmong community, or and then what happens to younger generations, or in the veterans community? We're like, well, we're talking to veterans, and it happens to be the same 20 male vets, and they're leaving all the women vets out. And so that's my only caution, is that I think it's both and. But your point of like we over tap or we continuously tap community, we're spreading them out, I think is a really valid point. And so, kind of that both and is where I think we need to go, and that both inviting them in and inviting new people in and going to their tables.
Thank you so much for that. This is such good reflection. So I'm going to do a little test now then to see, is this, Commissioner Carter, you still have your hand raised, but that's left over, or you're good. Okay. So I'm going to ask, I'm sensitive to the fact that Janet's here and will most likely not be here at our next meeting. If there's anything else you would like us to comment on, Janet. Sia, I'm asking you if there's if you can come back and do this, if this is an appropriate, stopping point. I realize we could go a few more minutes, but I don't want to get right in the middle of it. It feels as though, we want to hear what you've been working on, but it feels as though it would start to be a longer conversation. So I'm touching base now with everyone on the call to see what people think, and maybe Elizabeth, you want to shed some light, or Janet, I definitely want to give you a few minutes to talk, Janet, before you leave, as this is your workshop. And as I said, I don't want to shortchange it. So
thank you.
Yeah.
If I can speak then at this point, I'm really glad you're having this conversation, because I think the one recommendation, well, two of them actually, that are kind of working side by side are the expanding the diversity of representation at the table, and the realigning and leveraging existing councils. That has been a struggle, because there's, as you might expect, there's some resistance that people put up with if you're going to change what I've been a part of. You know, that the first reaction can be from people to sort of say, wait a minute, you know, we've got, it's almost like you're questioning their validity. And so I think that it has been challenging to know how exactly to go about that, because when you're talking about things that kind of have been a legacy, and it's like, does that still meet the need though for both the community and the county at this point? And so, yeah, that there, it's a lot of structural adjustments that would need to be made and a lot of communication and conversation. But it, to me, I would just say, I applaud you for bringing this up. I think it is important that we don't just carry on, you know, 32 councils the way that they have been.
And I appreciate that, Janet. And so while you've got the floor, is there anything else you want us to make sure we pay attention to? I mean, you know what Sia is going to present to us. I'm going to propose at our next meeting. Is there anything else that we should talk about while you're here that you would really like our conversation on while you're in this meeting? Janet, if there's anything
No,
else.
I think that this, what you've just talked about has been, yeah.
Okay.
What you've just talked about, I think, is really, to me, the crux, the hardest
Okay.
thing and the most important thing to really adjust.
Okay, I appreciate that.
I
Thank
think I
you.
saw that, did Commissioner Ortega have a hand up?
Oh boy, I don't even see him on the call. If he does, I don't see it. But thank you for thinking
Oh,
about
okay.
that. I don't know. But
Okay.
so I'm going to ask Elizabeth what your thoughts are, or Ryan, you know, what are we thinking? Do we think this is appropriate to hold off for the next conversation, and you kind of know where we're heading out? And if I welcome any other commissioners to weigh in here.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I would suggest that I'll work with Sia to make sure it's a date that works well for her, and we'll jump directly into her component next time to talk about action steps moving forward. What I really also want to do is think with Sia and Elizabeth about, since this conversation started, the organization has both organized its work, created racial and health equity teams, as well as employee support groups. And part of the conversation you just had is a question that we should ask about: how do our employee support groups not only work inside the org, but actually engage with outside entities and bring them into the fold to then engage with the board? And that's a question I have written down in front of me that I have not until this thought through. So let's take that as a takeaway. We're going to probably add a slide or two, and then we'll be back later this month with part 2 and the discussion.
I really appreciate that. And so I'm going to look to my colleagues. If there's anything else that you want to make sure we cover in part 2, you can let us know now. And I'm seeing that, you know, I mean, and if there's something else that comes up, I'm sure you can bring that up, you know, after this meeting to make sure that it's included. I want to for sure thank Janet for all your work, and you can follow us on online, Janet, and learn what we're doing with all of this great work that you're doing. So we know that you're vested in this and you care about it. So we're happy to have you participate in whatever way you can, but we know that you'll be following it anyway. That's great. And Sia, is that okay? Sia, then if you come back and we'll give you the time that you deserve to really present this. Is there anything else, Elizabeth?
Commissioner Ortega's hand, Madam Chair.
Okay, now Commissioner Ortega. So Commissioner Ortega, you're coming in on the meeting when we're deciding that we're going to take the next step at another time, but you have a question here. Yeah.
Madam Chair, I've been in the meeting from the very beginning, but I had technical difficulties. There was a one-way feed. I saw and heard you, but you could not see or hear me. And all of a sudden, I kept checking in and out and finally got the visual going. But I got the, well, I just want to thank Janet again for all the great work she's done on this, and continue.
Thank you. I'm glad you've been a part of it. Sorry, Commissioner Ortega, I didn't realize Janet saw that you were there, but I couldn't. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So with that, I don't see any other hands, but Elizabeth, do you have any final remarks that that you would like to make?
I do not, Madam Chair, other than to congratulate Janet on her last week.
Oh, I know. We just thank you so much, the whole team. But Janet, thank you for all your work, and we'll get the thanks to you at our next meeting too. But thanks so much for everything. Thanks all of you for being at this meeting, and we look forward to our next conversation about this, which will be whenever we can schedule it on the county plan. So anyway, with that, I will adjourn this workshop, and we will see you at 1:30, Madam Chair. Is that when our next workshop is? Is that 1:30, I think? Yeah, led by Commissioner Ortega. Okay, thanks everyone. Have a good lunch. Okay, take care. Bye-bye.